Buongiorno. Mark my words, Mel. Early by Christmas.
Even now, less than a score of years after the World War,
hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact.
we shall never surrender!
This is the Militaria podcast, brought to you by your friends at Queen City Militaria, Wehrmacht Militaria, and SMG War Relics.
Welcome to the Militaria podcast. My name is Joshua Doda. I run Queen City Militaria, and I'm joined today by a few of my buddies. Dante Gambino of SMG War Relics.
I am not a crook.
Interesting choice for the introduction. Billy Kramer of WehrmachtMilitaria.com.
Hello, everybody. I'm also not a crook, but I don't need to do the Nixon impersonation.
And today's extra buddy, today's extra learned doctor of the topic of Militaria is Connor Palmer.
Hey, fellas. Happy to be here.
So before we get to today's topic, Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, how did you get into the hobby? What are your particular interests?
Yeah, no problem. So, yeah, I've been collecting now for about 5 years. Started when I was in college. And yeah, I mean, mainly what I've been collecting as of late, which kind of feeds into what we're talking about, is mainly Weimar era organizations with more of a specialization in the left side of the political aisle. So we're talking the KPD, and then their version of the SA, which is the Roter Front Kampfverbund, which is what we'll be talking about in extent today. And we'll be taking a look at a couple different things that I have in my collection, things I've been able to pull online from archives, and then a bunch of stuff from my friend's collection, which is going to be really cool.
This is our first time that we've actually had somebody reach out and be like, hey, I have this really awesome collection, all this information to share, and sort of take the lead with the research. So thank you very much for doing all that, and very excited to learn something from you tonight.
Hey, yeah, definitely glad to show everyone and everything. And also a neat little piece, I don't know how well it's going to come up, but you guys had talked about the Reichsbanner in the last podcast. So, and you guys had said you hadn't really seen much from them, but this is an actual membership book from them and their membership badge. So I don't really know how,
super cool.
But yeah, I got that out of Germany, out of a collection about a year ago. So that was kind of a neat little piece as well. A little off topic, but I mean, they had some conflicts with them. So, you know, it's kind of neat as well.
So, am I correct in thinking that you prepared a slideshow for us today?
Yes, that is correct.
Woohoo! Love me some slideshows.
Basically, we're going to be taking a nice, brief, in certain circumstances, in other certain circumstances, a little bit extensive look into the KPD and the Roter Front Kampfverbund. As I said earlier, the KPD was the German Communist Party, and the Roter Front Kampfverbund, or as we'll probably call it throughout the podcast, the Rot Front, was their paramilitary organization and veterans organization. So it was all bundled up in one, similar to the SA or the Stahlhelmbund. So let's get cracking.
Can I ask you a question real quick about this photograph that we're looking at?
Yeah, of course.
The guy in the bottom left there, does he just have a huge schnoz, or is he rocking a Hitler mustache? Because I can't really tell what's going on with that dude's face.
That's a good question. I'm pretty certain he is, actually.
Yeah, that's either a weird shadow or a Hitler mustache.
Yeah, I
All
definitely
right, proceed with the. I just, I wouldn't have thought they were, trying to look the same as the Nazis.
It's a toothbrush mustache, man.
Well, as you know, especially at this time period, I mean, we're talking about a bunch of World War I veterans, so that was a sign of respect from the First World War to show that you were a veteran. So you did see a lot of people across the political aisle, I guess you could say, or political thinking, that would as well have the toothbrush mustache. So, yeah, very interesting. I don't really know if I have any other photos in here that'll show that, but I've seen it elsewhere. So I have direct family ties to the KPD through my great-grandfather, who you can see in the top right there. My great-grandfather was a card-carrying KPD member beginning in 1928 in Munich, which was a little odd because the KPD didn't have the biggest stronghold in Munich at that time. He actually joined because he was working in a construction company in their finance department. And while in the finance department, he actually started hanging out with a bunch of the workers for this construction company. And he started going to KPD meetings. And from there, he ended up joining the party in 1928. By 1930, he was recruited by the local KPD leaders to actually become a spy for their political intelligence wing named the Apparat, which was this intelligence organization that the KPD had gathered together, and all of their main operatives were trained by Soviets in Moscow. So
Interesting.
they had taken political leaders, which the leader at the time was Hans Kippenberger, who my great grandfather would eventually report to directly in the summer of 1932 during the July elections. But they were all trained, like I said, in Moscow. Everything they did was highly illegal, according to the constitution of the Weimar government. But when has that ever stopped them? So he was selected because of his military service in the Great War. And at that time, he was politically unknown. So he could easily be inserted in, considering his strong background, in the military. And he was also a member of the Der Stahlhelmbund. I think just mainly because of that was a big veterans organization in Munich. So I think that's why he was already a member there, even though obviously he leaned left, politically speaking. So he would eventually go on to spy for the NSDAP. He was hired on by the party as an accountant in July of 1930, with him eventually working in the Braun Haus recording department. There, he mainly handled the recording of membership dues, making sure people stayed up on their payments to the party and were good, party members for the time. So he would additionally join the party in August of 1930, and then join the SA around the same time as well. He wasn't active that much in the SA. He never became anything more than an SA man while he was in there. His main bread and butter was trying to get as much information as it could for his handlers inside the Apparat for the KPD's betterment when it came to their political things that they could do against the SA. He actually wrote extensively about Ernst Röhm and his proclivities and affairs that he would have with SA men inside the Braun Haus. And through doing separate research, I found out the KPD, because a lot of their stances didn't really use that information as much as one would think, because at the time that was a big scandal. Now, the SPD and their newspapers especially were known to have published about it, but the KPD a lot less so, even though my great-grandfather was known to have written up reports and articles that were published in papers. Some were omitted or rewritten. So, but that was one thing that he had talked about extensively.
So I just got a question, man. How much of this is like well-known information in your family? Like, at what age did you find out about, double agent grandpa?
Good question. So this came about through a lot of extensive family research, because we had known that to spoil it, we knew he had been in Dachau as a prisoner. So we didn't really know why, besides some Red Cross paperwork that we got in 2006 when I was a child. And at that time, we sort of knew that he was in there for political reasons, but we had no idea of how he got in there or what happened. So my uncle started digging into all this, and it just opened Pandora's box. I mean, all this information came to light, and it was honestly like just really crazy, because we didn't expect much. And then there's a couple things that we'll see a little later on that we were able to uncover that was just amazing to see. So my uncle did that research mainly over the last 6 years. And this is to lead back to what you were talking about earlier, what got me in the hobby is this. Doing this research into him got me completely into collecting. Because before that, I just loved history. But now I can sort of, it makes you realize, once you start getting involved into further family research, and then you start looking oh, there's actually stuff available that you can buy in the military market. Okay, let's go check this out.
Right.
So
you feel that personal connection to it. You can hold it in your hand as well as having the stories.
Exactly. Yes. So, and unfortunately, I have nothing of his. As we said, he eventually went into a camp. So a lot of his stuff the family doesn't have. So if you guys noticed on that one photo, in the foreground, I do believe this to be my great-grandfather working in the Braun Haus. This picture was taken in 1931 by Hoffman, a little bit after the Braun Haus had opened. And then this is a picture of him in 1936. This photo is known to have been taken in the recording department. And having looked at several family photos, I mean, the nose, the awful hairline, which luckily I don't have.
Yeah, you're like 90% there. I mean, it's got.
Yeah. So I'm pretty dang certain that's him. And also the fun fact right there, those are membership cards.
Somebody watching this podcast has one of those cards in the box in front of them.
And
you know that's got to be the case.
Right. And the interesting thing is I actually found out those were the membership cards were all supposed to be burned in 1945. They were all sent down to a paper mill in southern Bavaria, and only about like 10% of them were burned before U.S. troops came in. And then up until 1994, the U.S. government and military still held on to the internal NSDAP membership cards. And then after 1994, they gave them back to the German government. So a lot of them are now in the German archives. Later on, in 1931, he would transition to the SS. He decided to leave the SA and go to the SS because at the time, the KPD and himself saw it as a better route to get information. He was approved personally by Heinrich Himmler because in the early days, Heinrich Himmler was such a top-down individual with anything he did that he was manually processing and approving membership applications to the SS. So once he was approved, he joined as a Scharführer. Then a month later, he was promoted to a Truppführer. And then 8 months after that, he became a Sturmband adjutant with the rank of Sturmführer, which at the time would have been
First lieutenant.
Well, first,
lieutenant.
Yeah, because there wasn't like a Obersturmführer in the early days or a Hauptsturmführer. So it kind of goes back and forth on, would you have called him a first lieutenant, second lieutenant, captain, because I think it was 1933 or 32. You might know better, Billy, that they eventually branched out kind of like the SA.
And became the Hauptsturmführer and so on and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but yes, at the time, so we're talking December of 1931, he was a Sturmband adjutant with the rank of Sturmführer. His final Sturmbannführer was Johann Hans Maier, who was a decorated World War I German tank driver who served in the same, just not the same tank battalion. We're talking the same exact tank as Sepp Dietrich, and was later a blood order recipient. So
what an interesting fact. That's incredible.
It is, and that came through researching him, Hans Maier. That was separate research that I did. Extremely interesting guy. He actually eventually got kicked out of the SS because he was a devout Catholic, and Himmler, for some reason, besides the fact that he was an Alterkämpfer or old fighter, Himmler, I guess, maybe just didn't like his work ethic. So he tried to find whatever he could do to get him to leave, including promoting him out of the way to some group that was way outside of Munich where his family was. So he eventually left because of the Lebensborn program, and Himmler was trying to have him have extramarital affairs, and Hans Maier wasn't going to have any. So he left the SS in 36.
Yeah. Interesting, though, not just to interject real quick, it's interesting that while he was being forced out of the SS, that Sepp Dietrich didn't stick up for him, because obviously he had personal contact with Himmler at all times of hey, I know this individual and he's a great guy, and he's Catholic, but you can't.
Exactly. But I know from doing other research, Himmler and Dietrich butted heads a lot because Himmler was obviously so tied to the racial thinking of the SS, because there were several applicants that Dietrich thought were perfect for the LSSAH, but then Himmler would shoot them down because of some minor thing. Same thing goes with a lot of Hitler's interpersonal bodyguards that had a lot of issues. Whenever they get moved away, Dietrich would cause a fit, and then Hitler would actually have to step in and override Himmler. So I don't know how the relationship evolved, but I know in the beginning, Hans Maier joined the SS because of Sepp Dietrich. And when he joined, became immediately a Sturmführer. So he had the inroads in with the SS. But this is actually a picture of Hans Maier that I own in my collection.
I've seen that photo. I've seen him for sure.
Yeah, this I got out of an auction out of Arizona last year. My buddy sent me the listing. He's like, "Oh, there's some first SS photos in here. You might like it." And then this lot came up, and I knew the picture immediately because he's once you obsess over a family member and you try and find these individuals. Like I only had one other picture of him, but this is the postcard itself. So
no, like I said,
awesome.
I recognize that guy
Yeah.
immediately. Absolutely, man.
But the really interesting thing though is it's signed by him and it's stamped by the Sturmband that he was a Sturmbannführer for, and it says my loyal Mitarbeiter, like worker, a small gift, Christmas 1932, Heil Hitler. But sadly, this one, you can't see his tank badge, which I believe is on his right breast pocket. But there's another picture I have of him. I don't have it in the slideshow, but you can actually see the tanker's badge on there, which those are super rare.
Yes, they are.
And go for a lot of money. But they're awesome badges. I don't think I've seen one in person. I was told, though, that Sepp Dietrich's was in auction a couple of years ago. That at least I was told that by someone. I don't know if that was credible or not, or if it actually could be contributed to him. But nonetheless, they're super neat badges. So, but
you would expect a slightly better Christmas gift from such a high-ranking guy,
right? And I don't really know. I don't know if he was just giving those to people in his Sturmband, maybe the Sturmführers that were underneath and the different Sturms or whatnot. But
how vain though. How vain is that?
Like, think of me.
Yeah.
Here's a Christmas present. Here's a picture of me as a Christmas present. I'm going to start doing that to you guys for Christmas. You're just going to get a picture of me going.
Of you every Christmas on my fridge. You already do that.
No, I can send you pictures of my kid. What do I don't
You're a regular Sturmführer.
So you guys were asking earlier about the internal membership cards. So this is my great-grandfather's internal membership card. His name was Georg Wagner. Born April 18th, 1893 in Nuremberg. So there's his address he was living at when he joined the party. There's his party membership number, 271,556. And he joined on August 1st, 1930, or that's when he was allowed entry into the party. So, fairly early member at the time. This is the picture of him in his SS officer's uniform from this December 15th, 1931. So the interesting thing is kind of hard to tell, but he's wearing an SA armband, not SS, which isn't uncommon, but nonetheless. And the other really interesting thing is it's December 1931. He's wearing an SS officer's buckle, which a lot of people have said that those came out, in early to mid 32. So it's kind of it's neat seeing one this early. Date on a picture dated 1931.
Yeah, that's Overhof pre-RZM did have just their company logo on that. So I mean that absolutely was in existence. And real quick, let me interject with this: that Aguilette, that's actually the one Dante sold me. Remember that?
I do. He had to beg, borrow, and steal to twist my arm to let that go.
He's an extremely well-decorated guy too, huh?
Yes. So he has the Bavarian Merit Cross, third class with swords, Iron Cross, second class. That's the Kyffhauserbund medal for veterans. And then the Bavarian Long Service Medal, third class for, that would be 9 years of service. And then this is an interesting badge. It took me a while to figure out what it was, but I only found out what it was through reading some letters that he had written when he was in prison in 1933 or 32. That is a Prince Alphonse badge, which
interesting.
You really don't see those in wear on an individual, but those were given out after the war. He was mainly with the Stahlhelmbund, and that's where my great grandfather got it for quote unquote faithful service to the fatherland. And then he had a silver wound badge.
Was his membership in the Stahlhelmbund also part of the Let's Spy on the Nationalist Elements of Germany at the time, or was he a member prior to his career as a spy?
Prior to, as far as I can tell. He doesn't say exactly when he joined, but I do know that he at least was a member in 1930, and he didn't write in anything after 1945 or before about any reasons for being in the Stahlhelmbund. Besides, in his words, he said, "I was a member, but I didn't take much pride in the membership because I wasn't a fan of war." So he was one of the veterans that actually looked at the horrors of the First World War, and I think that's also a reason why he ended up going into the KPDs, because they were pacifistic in their rhetoric and, in their stance on, government spending and things like that when it came to, different war projects. So, I think that's a lot of I don't think he was in there for any other reason than just comradeship. Maybe some of his old comrades were in there. So I think that's probably why.
At the bottom of his paperwork here, I noticed there is a note about the KPD. So was this recorded by the party? Like, did they found out? Obviously, he ended up in prison.
Right. So yeah, Ausgetreten, which is like reason for leaving the party. December 12th, 1932. Someone's signature, but in red ink they put KPD Spitzel, which is KPD spy. So
this is insane, man.
Yeah, that I think that stood out to me, and that's what I thought you were going to talk about when you
the most
I was like, oh, I know what you're talking about, because I thought I was like, that says KPD spy. That's got to be what that says. I thought that was the neatest thing on there.
Because that's the thing. Like, someone could be like, oh, I've made this joke before. I'm like, oh, he just said he was a spy after the war, so he wouldn't get prosecuted. I've had people like say that to me, and then I'm like, well, really? I mean, I have this, and I have paperwork from Dachau, but yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story. As far as I can tell, he's the only German communist spy. From my research, it's not extremely extensive, but it's pretty extensive research. He's the only German communist spy that I have been able to see that has been able to survive the war and get out of a camp, because he was only in Dachau for 2.5 years.
Yeah, so, I'm surprised he wasn't shot on site once they found out.
Well, I was going to say that there's a couple stories in here I'll run through quick from his time in Dachau, which we're going to move to right now, when he had his downfall and imprisonment, and when he spent some time in Landsberg and then was transferred to Dachau. So after being arrested in August of 1932 for a beer hall brawl with members of the SA, he would be found as a spy for the communists. And that's a funny story as well. So long story short, he was out drinking with a couple of his SS friends in a beer hall in a part of Munich that was known as the Red District, where a lot of communists lived. It was kind of a communist neighborhood. And while he was in there, he was having drinks. His words were that he wasn't drunk. Having heard stories from my family, I kind of would assume that he probably had a little too much to drink. And these SA men were...
He was partying.
Yeah. The SA men apparently were jeering at him in his direction, and they had said Heil Rotfront and Heil Moscow. And he took offense to that. So he took the two SA men's SA cards and was going to report them to the party for maybe drunken lewdness or something like that, or, looking bad in uniform. That's what his justification was. And then they confronted him, wouldn't let him leave the beer hall. And then he got pushed down, and there was apparently about 30 of them. And he had a stiletto knife. And in his words, they fell into it. So,
oh my gosh.
So he got arrested for that because he stabbed two guys. And while he was in prison, his landlady, who was married to an SS man, for some reason went snooping through his apartment, found some paperwork and documents that he had written up that he was writing to the KPD handlers that he worked for. And she reported it to her husband. Her husband reported to Karl Horn, who was the the head of the secret SS interpersonnel department that oversaw spying on party members. So it took them a couple months, but they eventually got enough together to where they felt that they had to get rid of him. So on December 12th, 1932, he was expelled from the SS and the NSDAP.
Well, so I have a question.
Yeah.
So if he got in a fight at the bar, at the beer hall, because the SA guys said Hail Rowfront and were like almost mocking him. So somebody knew something already. That's what it sounds like. They were antagonizing him.
Hypothetically.
Right? So they're like, somebody must have said, this dude is in the Rowfront. I guarantee it, or something happened. And then they antagonized him to the point where he snapped. I mean, that's just, I have no idea, but that's what it sounds like. Why would you just say that to a bunch of SS guys? Because weren't the SS guys at that point, the SA guys wouldn't have really been fucking with the SS guys, would they?
They had a lot of.
I mean, I know they had beef, but I mean, that's a big hill to climb. I would say that would be very dangerous for an SA guy to start messing with an SS guy.
And that is true because he also was an SS officer. So
even more so, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of a big thing to go up and say that. But I know at the time they definitely did have their beef between each other. So maybe having him be in that beer hall, that they were just trying to shit talk, if you're asking me. But I mean, there is a possibility though that yes, because he did take quite offense to it. So that was definitely. I mean, it was a little over the top for him to do that, especially knowing what he was doing at the time. So,
conspiracy theory, you almost wonder if they were told to antagonize him to see if they would get a rise out of him.
Yeah, if he'd blow his cover, right?
Like if somebody already had a hunch that maybe this guy, was a libtard.
Yeah.
Maybe the landlady had already been snooping. That's an interesting story because then you talk about how many times in Nazi Germany the neighborhood turned on their own neighbors.
Right, exactly. And what's funny is people have talked about like beefsteak Nazis where they're brown on the outside, red on the inside, and there was a lot of, especially at this time, we're talking right around the November or July to November elections, where you had a lot of different communists that had moved politically to the SA or the NSDAP, because of their rhetoric and whatnot that they were saying. So, for them, they probably, like I said, they were just trying to get a jeer out of them, but I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. The SA guys in March of 1933, after the Nazis took over, they put my great-grandfather back on trial for the stabbing. And in those documents, they said, well, we knew he was a spy and this and that. But all the reports from back in August didn't say anything like that. So, but they said he was of ill character because he was found to be a spy or something like that. On March 16th, 1933, he was arrested actually by his former Sturm. So, Standard 1, Sturmband 3, Sturm 3, and taken to Munich police headquarters where he was brutally beaten on the personal orders of Heinrich Himmler. And Heinrich Himmler was the one that had signed the arrest warrant for my great-grandfather. He was arrested by his former Sturmbannführer, Hans Maier. And like I said, he was driven there and he was beaten nearly to death with steel rods and rubber truncheons. And then they collected his body, threw him in the police headquarters basement. And then 2 days later, supposedly, they basically went to collect his dead body and saw he was alive. So they put him back on trial for the stabbings.
Dude, after this podcast, Amazon is coming to get the rights to do a thing on this. Like Netflix or somebody's going to come do. I mean, this is a movie right here. This is insane.
My hope is to at some point sort of finish a book and then maybe even do a documentary. My pipe dream is definitely to do, a film, or there's a German series right now, the highest production value non-English series in the world that's ever been done. It's called Babylon Berlin. It's kind of set in the same time period. It follows a police officer in Berlin, though. But he had a storyline in season 3 that kind of follows along this line where he was a spy and he sort of started like a little inter-party insurrection sort of a deal. But it definitely, I think it has the juice to be able to make something like that. So I definitely would love to do something like that with this. It'd be good to pay homage.
There's obviously a market for it too. I mean, if somebody else already covered the story, it's a successful series, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why not broaden that subject out?
Yeah, and you did all the homework. So I mean, half of these stories are fictitious in nature that we watch and we love them, and then this is a real one. The homework is there, the facts are there, you've got it all laid out. So it's like, the whole thing about the truth is stranger than fiction. Like this is better. This is the real juicy stuff.
Yeah, no, it would be fun to do something like that. I'd hope to, but Who knows? So after he was brutally beaten in that nature, put back on trial, he was sentenced to 9 months in Landsberg prison, which is also where Hitler spent time after the putsch. That was their main political prison that they had at the time in Bavaria. So he had spent time there, and then he was obviously transferred to Dachau. Unfortunately for him, a lot of people that he had known in the SS, because of the proximity of the first SS in Munich to the camp in Dachau, a lot of them were transferred there as guards in the early days. And this is a really neat picture. This is from December 1933. This is, I forget what Sturm or Sturmbannert it is, but there's a Sturmführer in the foreground here, and then these are all his different comrades. But it's hard to make out, and I can't zoom because of PowerPoint. But this guy's giving bunny ears in the background. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Look at that.
Yeah. So I'll have to get Josh the photo so he can blow it up. Considering the nature of what they did on a daily basis, that's crazy to me. That's
you gotta have fun.
But yeah, you do.
You gotta have fun.
No matter what you do. These guys.
It doesn't like a little lighthearted Nazi. You know what I mean, guys? Come on.
They still told jokes, man.
It's a boys' club at the end of the day, right? They're just doing really nasty, evil shit.
Right. Yeah, he arrived at the camp on January 22nd, 1934, and immediately was beaten the minute he stepped off the bus. There was a Scharführer that was calling for him. They said, "Where's the spy?"
Oh, yeah, they're waiting for him.
They immediately pulled him out of line and did an immediate groin check, and then they just beat the shit out of him on the ground while everyone else got in line. This continued nonstop for 3 days, and he was particularly harassed and beaten by the kitchen staff. These 3 guys in the kitchen, I'm under the presumption that they had known him previously. As a couple of the other inmates had said in records that were pulled from post-war trials, they had, particularly found a liking to just be kicking the shit out of him. So this had gone on for some time. It eventually stopped because they had seen that he had a double hernia that he had never gotten treated. And apparently the story goes that the beatings had stopped at that time because they saw that as, someone that had served during the war, and those were war injuries. So according to what he says, after that was noticed, and that was taken into account, apparently, the beatings slowly started to digress, compared to the daily basis.
Maybe the whole reason why he wasn't killed was because these guys knew him and they wanted to fuck with him, and they didn't just want to kill him, right? Because if it wasn't personal, you would just be like, oh, that guy's a spy, and you just shoot him and he'd be done for. But this was more personal. They knew him. They worked together. They did shit together. They were part of the same crew. So this was like, oh, I don't want to kill him. I want to keep this guy going because I want to punch him in the face whenever I want to. It's more personal for me. So that might have kept them alive.
I mean, it definitely was, I think, a considering factor because, that's one of the worst things in their eyes that you could do is to betray the movement. And he did it at the highest, somewhat the highest level, especially inside the SS, which was a trusted organization that prided itself on security and, background checking and all this stuff. So this was a major no-no. But he would be saved twice by work detail sergeants from the pit, which if you've ever read anything from Dachau, the pit was where they would send people in front of a firing squad and kill them. So he actually was pulled out by these work detail sergeants. And apparently these 2 specific work detail sergeants had a lot of sway with the guards. And they were able to convince them that he was too important to kill. So these work detail sergeants were prisoners inside the camp that had a lot of sway and had a lot of responsibility. So through them, he actually was able to, stay alive, even though, he was more than likely not going to be killed on at least 2 occasions, according to the documentation I've been able to pull from firsthand accounts from prisoners in the camp that had went on trial afterwards.
So, the way you were talking about, he's, basically the capo, and obviously it's in Dachau, it's a little different, but basically they kept him alive. But also, he knows the inner workings of the KPD and how a spy network works. So you would think that they would want to interrogate him for future, sniffing out other guys.
Yeah, that makes
of
sense.
like, what are you actually doing, and how does it operate, and what are you actually reporting on? So I mean, he has extremely valuable intel, and I can see why they would want to keep him alive to a degree.
Well, right. And the other thing too is he never, through all the beatings, he still towed the line that he was not a spy. He never admitted to it. They didn't have apparently concrete enough evidence, but they had enough to say this guy's fishy. He's probably a spy, and we need to kick him out of the party. From then on, he, even through all these beatings and everything inside Landsberg, where he was harassed, but not to a great extent, and then at Dachau, they kept trying to get him to admit to it because that was a common tactic, especially when they would put them in the standing cells, the dark standing cells, which he had spent time in there. When he arrived at the camp as well, an SS guard gave him a noose and said, you might as well just take care of it yourself.
How could they not have concrete evidence when you have concrete evidence? Like they couldn't find the stuff that you found?
The KPD, I'm pretty certain, especially with someone like him, probably internally would have pulled his membership card and stuck it in the apparat, which is the spying agency's file, to sort of have it put out of the way so that he could fly under the radar if the KPD office ever got raided. Because the apparat information was either destroyed or taken to the Soviet Union when members were fleeing, because they started to flee the country basically the day the Reichstag fire happened. They got their crap and they burned it, or they went to the Soviet Union. They kept people underground, but the leadership of the apparat itself actually fled. That's why there's very little written material on the organization. Like I think there's 2 books, but they're not on the organization. They just include information about it. It was very secretive. Stories like my great grandfather's are very hard to find for apparat agents. So it's really weird. I've tried to do all the research I could into them. It's very vague. I know there was 6 departments. Anyways, that's a story for a whole nother time. Anyways, he would work tirelessly in his role as a clerk for the Division of Labor inside the camp to protect fellow communists from SS guards by making sure they would go into labor details, which usually had fewer hardline guards working in them. They usually had a little bit more freedom in those labor details. And because of my great-grandfather's background working as an accountant, he eventually, I think, won back some favor with guards in the camp, especially the higher level ones, administrative guards, that he eventually got a decent role working in the camp.
I'm glad you touched on this, because this is what I was wondering when they were saying, he's too important for us to execute. I mean, obviously he was pretty good at his job beforehand to have risen through the ranks in the party like he did. So they must have found a position for him that was suited to his skills.
Right, exactly. And that's definitely how they treated it with them. What their purpose was with these camps, obviously, was to torture and maim people, but they also saw them as a rehabilitation camp to basically reset people to sort of get back into the Volksgemeinschaft, the citizens, become a regular citizen again. So, I'm assuming because he also would never admit to being a spy, eventually maybe some of the allure sort of wore off, and they eventually started to treat him as a regular inmate in the camp. And so he would eventually be released on June 20th, 1936. This is his release paperwork that he got when he left the camp. So it has his prisoner number on there, 6,736. It's signed by the commandant of the time, SS Oberfuhrer Hans Loritz. It's just some other basic stuff.
That's got to be a rare document. I don't think I've ever seen a release document.
Yeah, getting out of Dachau. Honestly, he sounds like the Andy Dufresne of Dachau. He was like given a position, like he was too important. He had perks, and he's, it really does. I mean, to a degree.
I agree. I was also, I keep getting visions of Slaughterhouse-Five in my head as well. But yeah, there's a lot of fictional characters that are coming to mind with this story. This is crazy.
Right. And yeah, it's the interesting thing. I just noticed this. It says something like about 15 Reichsmarks on here. So I don't know if that someone had to pay for him to get out of the camp, or
maybe that's what they gave him. Get the fuck out of here. His 15 Reichsmarks.
or
$15
yeah,
bucks.
maybe. So, but like
They
you,
pinned $5 to his collar, dude, and they put him on a train. So get out of here.
like Dante said, I've never seen this document in the flesh. This is in the Bavarian archives, a part of one of his files. So the prisoners would have been given this, and they were told to keep it, with them and on their person at all times. So it's interesting. These more of these should exist out there, but besides this one that I've seen in his file.
You gotta keep it in case they accuse you of the same shit again. Be like, listen, there's no double jeopardy here, guys. I already served my time. It's like getting pulled over. Like,
I was just thinking this, dude.
You're on the way. You got like one headlight out, and you get pulled over, and then you get your ticket, and then like 20 minutes down the road, you get pulled over again. You're like, wait a minute, here's my ticket. I already got in trouble.
Triple stamp and double stamp.
So maybe that's why. I don't know, but it's fascinating. But it makes total sense. Yeah, save this so you don't get fucked again.
Right. And so I ended there because most of his story primarily ends after he got out of Dachau. There isn't further information, but a lot of that is fledged out through family stories. So, and we've already hit a lot of the juicy stuff. There's a lot of other things he did after the war, where he continued and remained active in the KPD underground. But this is what, like I said, got me involved in this part of the hobby, this part of history. And it's definitely, why I'm so actively interested in it.
So after this, he just kind of stayed out of the way of things. He didn't get involved in anything, like stayed quiet about shit.
Yes, he remained active in underground KPD, I guess functionaries. He remained in contact with the ones that got out of the camp. They would apparently, some of them would still meet up and listen to a couple of different radio broadcasts, including there was one from Moscow and one from Britain, that they had these radios that they had modified that they could listen to those networks. So they would occasionally get together and meet and listen to those.
Do you know, was he stripped of his NSDAP membership, or was he re-indoctrined and allowed to still be a member of the NSDAP?
He was never allowed back in.
So that was it. You fucked up, you're done. Okay.
And that was the other thing too. So before he got arrested in March of 1933, he kept reapplying to join the party because he's like, I'm not a spy.
Right. Well, that makes sense to try to do that, even if you were, to make you look good.
Yes, exactly. So, and then, also to confirm again that it wasn't a case of, misidentification of him as a spy. After the war, when he went through the trials, all these people that came to the trials had spoken on his behalf, stating that he was, in fact, he worked for them inside the KPD. So the guy that he actually reported to in the Apparat had survived the war and was working in the Dachau concentration camp after the war for refugee care. And he went on trial and actually gave a testimony about how my great-grandfather Georg worked for him for a couple of years, feeding information and what they did with it. So
I'm starting to think this guy was a spy, just like they said.
Yeah. So just to dot all I's and cross all the T's, like he was a spy, 1000%. That's all. Everything's tracked and good to go. So yeah, in case there's any naysayers.
It's crazy that you're able to find all that stuff, man. I mean, before we move on, I think a lot of people try to research things in the hobby, that even stuff that they don't have like a familial connection to. And I know when it comes to the German side of things, I mean, Soviet stuff's a little easier to research, but it's people don't usually find this much material. So you kind of hit the jackpot, both with the family history prestige of all of it and the stuff that they managed to put in the archive and that you could dig up.
But also having two family members that are motivated to find stuff, it makes it so much easier, right? Because you're constantly like, oh, what did you find? Oh, and you're bouncing stuff off of each other. If you were doing it solo, you hit one brick wall and you're like, fuck this, I'm done.
Right. I mean, we've exhausted everything we can. The next thing is I need to get a contact in Munich that I can have go into the archive and start like getting, their hands on documents and start, because
there's a guy that does that for SS numbers. You should find him.
Kelba.
I don't remember his
Ross
name.
Kelba.
You give him SS numbers. He'll go into the thing and get you what you can find. It costs you a couple $100. I don't know if it's worth the time.
I reached out to him and because I didn't have an SS number, because he lost his SS number, because the SS was known for, unlike the NSDAP, of just earmarking and putting away membership numbers when they left. The SS would just re-give the number back out. So my great-grandfather's SS number, I don't know what it was because it got reassigned to someone else.
That's a really interesting point.
Crazy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I found that out the hard way because I was so excited. I'm like, oh, maybe I can look into it. But his SS file was burned after the war, or well, not after the war, before the war ended, and according to what someone said, 1944 to 45. And then his Gestapo file was also burned at that time, which I would pay anything to even glimpse at a couple documents in there, because I'd love to see the inter-SS communication on how did they come to finding out that he was a spy. Unfortunately, They burned all that at the end of the war.
Fuckers.
Yeah.
They love keeping all these records, and then they were like, oh, we got to throw them away.
Exactly.
Hey, everyone. Just want to say thank you for joining us for the first episode in our multi-part series about the KPD. We appreciate Connor Palmer's hard work and research and his willingness to share his own family history relating to the KPD with us. And in the next episode, we'll be covering the history of the party, the Rote Front, and some great artifacts from these organizations. As always, you can find me at queencitymilitaria.com. You can find Dante at war-relics.com. And you can find William the Bill Kramer at Wehrmacht-militaria.com. And yeah, we'll see you real soon for part 2.